Good evening and welcome to the fifth and final lecture in the 2023 Science for Alaska lecture series. Tonight we have Research Associate Professor Ken Tape and Alaska writer and wildlife photographer Seth Kantner presenting Gnawing and Thawing, Beavers and Rapid Change in Northwest Alaska. If this is your first time with us, welcome. And if you've been here in the last weeks, the last years, welcome back. Glad to have you here. I'm Rod Boyce from the UAF Geophysical Institute, Public Information Office. I know you're not here to listen to me tonight, so I'm going to run through a couple of announcements here real quick. The first one's a little bit of a challenge for me because what we're doing, it's for folks who can't see us, but maybe in the audience tonight here or online. The UAF Department of Equity and Compliance recommendations would like us to provide a brief physical description of myself. So here I am. So, but it's an important thing, really, it is. I'm about 5'10" and 3/4, sort of an average build, upper middle-aged guy. I'm proudly wearing my Geophysical Institute hoodie. It's dark. I'm wearing blue jeans, and I have sort of a white shirt on underneath, and I'm wearing glasses. So, my wife's in the audience, so I hope that was good enough. So, okay. All right. Before we go much further, we want to acknowledge the Alaska Native Nations upon whose ancestral lands we're located tonight and where our campuses reside. And in Fairbanks, our Trothieta campus is located on the ancestral lands of the Dene people of the lower Tanana River. We're happy to be able to be in person tonight. You know, the last couple of years, we were just online only because of the COVID outbreak. So let's see, as I mentioned, this is our last talk for the year, but the lecture series has been a staple for 31 years. This year we're able to cover topics such as space debris, inspiring girls expeditions, the Aurora earthquakes, and tonight's topic of rapid change in Northwest Alaska. It's all made possible, of course, by our sponsors, the Geophysical Institute, the Triple Horn family, the Alaska Established Program to Stimulate Competitive Research, that's EPSCoR, Vic and Vicki Weinstein, and Life Water Engineering Company. So a big thank you to our sponsors. Can't do this without them. Now I've got to run through 7 announcements. If you have a cell phone, now would be a good time to silence it so we don't interrupt the presenters tonight or your neighbors. The lecture is being recorded. The video will be available for viewing online at the GI's website and YouTube channel shortly, though I do know that last week's we're going to be a little delayed in posting that one. Our crew is working on that. Restrooms, important information out that door to that way and down the hallway that way. There's an emergency exit out the back of the room, and regular exits are to the left and right where you came in. You were given a piece of paper, excuse me, as you entered that has a survey on how you heard about the lectures, and we'd really like you to fill that out. That can guide us in the future. On the opposite side of those surveys, you will find a spot to write your questions that you might have for the speaker. In addition, there's a QR code that you can scan to view live captions on any device with internet access. The lecture will last about 45 minutes. There'll be time for some questions afterward. So there's a couple of ways you can go about that. You can raise your hand, and I and my colleague, Ray, where is Ray? The microphone fairy, she's in here somewhere. We'll run around and bring a microphone to you. It's important that you use the microphone so our online audience can hear your questions. Let's see. Or you can fill out the little piece of paper we gave you, and we'll be happy to read the question for you. Okay, that's it for the announcements. Now I would like to introduce Ken Tape. Ken is a Gen Xer from Fairbanks. He is a product of the public school system here, including UAF. He studies a variety of natural science topics in the Arctic tundra. Most recently, the expansion of beavers and their engineering in northern and western Alaska. Ken will do the first part of the presentation, and at his conclusion, he will introduce Seth.
Thanks a lot, Rod. Appreciate it. It's great to see you all. Thank you all for coming out, truly. 31 years ago, Science for Alaska started. That must have been the year that I went to my first Science for Alaska lecture, because I think it was the early 90s, and I remember being in Ryan Middle School and seeing a talk by Keith Eckelmeyer on variegated glacier surging, and well, maybe a little seed was planted there. So thanks to the Geophysical Institute for hosting these all these years. Thanks to the production team for what you guys are doing too. Really appreciate it. So 45 minutes, I think it's going to be longer than 45 minutes, but I'm going to get through my part as quick as I can, about 20 minutes or so. And my presentation is maybe the view of landscape change in the Arctic, mostly from the office or maybe 10,000 feet. But I'm going to run you through that, just some basic background that I've learned over the last 20 years from research that I've been involved in. And then turn it over to Seth, who will have longer than 20 minutes to give a more intimate and I think immediate perspective on how the Arctic is changing. So this is I was asked to give this lecture a few months ago, and I gave this lecture about some version of it about 5 years ago. So that's why I thought, well, I'll blaze through this pretty quickly, update you on some things that we've learned since then, and then turn it over to Seth. I'll show you some repeat photography, glaciers, vegetation, and permafrost, and describe some more recent findings related to wildlife, in this case, moose and beavers. One thing that has happened since 2018 is National Geographic had this fold-out at a story about the Arctic, and they had this fold-out sort of idealized graphic where they depict a lot of the different changes that are occurring in the Arctic tundra, and some of these will be review or familiar to you all, but I'll run through these really quick. We got tundra fires over here. We all know a thing or two about that, just living in Fairbanks. We got a permafrost thaw slump right here. We got a retreating glacier. Got some thawing permafrost over here. You can see these ice wedges down here. Shrub expansion over here. Moose in the tundra. And then beavers even got their little cameo down in the corner, which was pretty exciting because back in 2019, we were kind of just getting underway with a lot of this stuff. So some repeat photography. Here's a picture from 1957 and 2007. This is Ed Sable on the left. That's me over here. This is on the Jago River, way up in northeast Alaska. And it's great because this guy, I had already done a bunch of this repeat photography. Dr. Sable sent me his old field notebook. And you see a picture like this and you think, well, and the caption says something like, west side of Jago River. Well, it's like Jago River is like 120 miles long, right? So that's kind of the fun of finding these old photos, right? But there was just enough in the picture. You can see a little mountain here, a little hill, and you can see a little lake out here. There was just enough to get back to this spot. And it's really fun because you get back to these spots, and oftentimes you're, the last person to stand on that square of tundra was the photographer before you. Sometimes you might find a 100-year-old sardine can or something like that. So shrub expansion, it's pretty obvious here. There's actually a lot of permafrost thaw here too. This whole landscape over here is collapsing and subsiding. And I repeated hundreds of photos in the Brooks Range and North Slope and showed that the vegetation was really growing a lot taller in response to longer summers and warmer summers in the Arctic. I think it's pretty intuitive. Retreating glaciers. Here's a picture from Ernest Leffingwell in 1907. The bottom picture is by Matt Nolan in 2007. I was standing next to Matt when he took this photo. You can see the glacier here in 1907, and by 2007 it's retreated all the way up valley. Same with this glacier. There's a glacier over here that's retreating. All the glaciers in the Brooks Range are retreating, and a lot of these little smaller hanging glaciers and things like that are actually disappearing. Here's a picture from the Canadian High Arctic. This might be the most concerning photo, at least in my slides. This is up around 79 degrees latitude, so it's way up there in the archipelago. You can see the picture in 2005. This is by Vlad Romanovsky, and then by 2013, you can see the permafrost has thawed and the ground's collapsed. It's thermokarst, right? But what's, I think, most concerning to me is, you can go from this top photo to the bottom photo in a couple really warm summers and perhaps warm winters. But I think it probably takes hundreds or even thousands of years to get back to that planar surface that you see in the top photo. And so that's just, that's a concerning thing about climate change in general, is just trying to figure out how much of this is reversible. All right, so a few pictures showing changes in vegetation from the North Slope and the Brooks Range. And I'd like to, at some point I started thinking about, well, how do these changes look through the lens of wildlife, particularly these shrub herbivores, because I was studying all this shrub expansion. So moose, oh, here's another thing that's changed since 2018. This guy here is now an Iditarod champion. That's Brent Sass. Give it up for Brent, who's out there right now. Yeah. And this was actually back in 2007. I think he had just finished, if I'm not mistaken, he had just finished his first Yukon quest 15 years ago, and, well, time marches on. But the point of the slide is that there's no moose habitat in this photo, and this is kind of what most of the North Slope and Brooks Range looks like for most of the winter season. You know, moose need some forage sticking above the snow to survive. Here's another one from that same year. Again, there's no moose habitat in this picture, and this describes most of the North Slope and Brooks Range of Alaska. But there are places where you see these little shrub patches, and you can see here a cow and a calf moose. And so my thought with this shrub expansion is, you know, if we go from this relatively shrub-free environment and we warm it up a bunch and grow a bunch of shrub habitat, would we see moose moving into these new habitats and new places in Alaska? And so I went through a lot of historical resources and a lot of traditional knowledge as well, and constructed this map here. So this is northern Alaska, of course. The green line here is tree line, so the tundra is everything out here and out here in the west. And using those sources, I constructed this map, which basically shows moose distribution moving out into the tundra over the last 100 to 150 years. And most of this map is made by asking the question, is moose part of the traditional hunt in whatever village? And if not, when was the first moose shot in that village? And so, you know, in Kotzebue, it's about 1951 or 1953. In Noatak, it's 1964. And so by just asking that question and looking at the answers, you get a general idea of how moose have expanded into this new habitat. And we have our thought was that they were following their shrub habitat into these tundra regions. And I should mention too that a recent master's thesis in Southwest Alaska, so way down here in Togiak National Wildlife Refuge, really tightened that connection between shrub habitat and moose populations doing better. I didn't mention snowshoe hares. Snowshoe hares have about the same shrub habitat requirement as moose. Well, let's talk about beavers a little bit. So beavers is about, 6-7 years ago, we started this. We had the idea that, I started wondering about what the next creature was going to be who wandered into the Arctic, and beavers made the short list. And I guess the important thing about beavers is that they leave a mark that you can see from space. And so unlike most wildlife, where even basic things like where are they and how many of them are there are really expensive or even just impossible to answer, with beavers you can see these beaver ponds forming and disappearing in satellite imagery and old aerial photography. And so we used that tool to start to look at how beaver distribution was changing. And I want to acknowledge a couple colleagues who have helped me tremendously in building this research program. Ben Jones, also at UAF, and Jason Clark, who is a PhD student and a postdoc here, and who recently has moved on to a new job. But both these guys have contributed heavily to the slides and the research we've been doing. So some fun facts about beavers. You guys are probably familiar with most of this stuff. They found throughout most forested portions of the state, and some tundra portions, as it turns out. They need 2 or 3 feet of water year-round, right? So if the ice freezes all the way to the bottom of their pond, they're out of luck. And Seth will talk a little bit more about some of these things. Water provides a refuge from predators. And then, of course, they don't hibernate, right? That's kind of one of the more amazing things. Well, hibernation is amazing in its own way, but beavers actually cache all these shrubs and saplings where they exist. They cache them, and then they sort of munch on that cache all winter long, which is just remarkable. And I still really don't understand how, a bundle of shrubs or a couple bundle of shrubs lasts a family of beavers an entire winter, but they do. And yeah, so there's a few things about beavers. And hey, who knows our local cartoonist, Jamie Smith, right? Yeah, Jamie. And, the beavers is kind of like one of his mascots, right? Well, this turns out to be a prophecy. This cartoon is from 2001, and he's got this beaver standing there looking out over this, it looks like tundra to me, right? A few trees, but, and sure enough, that is exactly what was happening in 2001, and beavers proceeded to march into the tundra by the hundreds and even thousands and really dam it all. So, way to go, Jamie. All right, so I saw a few pictures of beaver ponds in the tundra. This is looking directly down on a beaver pond. You can see the lodge right here. This is out on the Seward Peninsula. This is a dam right here. It's about 85 meters long or so. I can tell you that last year was more like 130 meters long. It got a lot bigger. There's another dam right here. And you can go up and downstream. And, this is a stream that was once as wide as my office. And now it's just this sprawling wetland all the way up and down it. So really profound changes the way they, construct their homestead or whatever you want to call it. This is from the Denali Highway. There's some good places along the Denali Highway you can see beaver ponds as well. This is what it looks like in winter out in the tundra in some of these windswept areas. Seth will show some more pictures along these lines. This is flow direction right here. Here's a snow machiner with a couple sleds. That is the beaver lodge right there. And I mean, we drilled into this pond and it was like this much water at the bottom. This was last spring. And sure enough, by August, that colony was thriving. They were doing fine. So it's pretty impressive, the conditions that they can survive in. Again, here's water flow direction here. And so one of the cool things about beavers is when they build these ponds, they make the water a lot deeper, and they allow that water, as a result, to remain frozen for a lot more of the winter. And in the summer, that water is absorbing more energy from the sun. And so we think of these beaver ponds as being oases on the tundra. And this is kind of a cool picture because here's the flow direction here. The whole stream is frozen, right? Not necessarily all the way to the bottom, but there's no surface water. And then sure enough, here's the dam, right? And right below the dam, you've got open water at the surface at the end of winter. So again, that's warm water that's leaking out from this dam. There's the lodge right there. Another picture from the Denali Highway. So we're gonna zoom out in a little bit, but I want you to keep this image in mind. This is actually one of the first sort of beaver pond complexes that I explored. There's a beaver pond here, there's a beaver pond here. This is basically all the water in this picture, except for the river channel, is being stored on the landscape by beaver engineering. I got out here in a pack raft and I couldn't boat and I couldn't walk. It was an absolute nightmare. I got lost back here in like a labyrinth of channels, and swearing ensued, and I eventually made it out to the river right here. Floated down, you can see a dam here. There's a lodge here, there's a lodge, there's a dam here. But so when you think about the future Arctic and how beavers are changing the landscape, this is a good mental picture to have. So some of the big questions we're asking: what is the scale of beaver engineering in the Arctic, and how is that changing? We have an answer for Alaska. The answer is big. We don't have that answer for northern Canada yet. We're working on it. And then what is the nature of these impacts? So what does it mean when you take a little stream as wide as my office and you turn it into this sprawling wetland? And the answer to that is we're starting to understand some of the impacts to permafrost. Otherwise, there's a lot more research underway and that other people are doing as well. This is what it looks like in satellite imagery. So this is old aerial photography actually, but this is color infrared photography. So it's actually, everything that's red is actually green, right? This is just green tundra. That's the flow direction. Again, there's that stream that's about as wide as my office in 1980. This is out on the Seward Peninsula. By 2019, it's just a completely different place. These are all dams, right? Everything that's black are beaver ponds. So these are dams. There's just dams everywhere and lodges. And so it's just a really almost unrecognizable. And you can see, as guys who studied landscape change, particularly Ben Jones and I, when we saw this, we're used to counting like a few extra shrubs and yeah, there's a little bit of permafrost all over here, but this was just like, wow, this is just completely different than than it used to be. Here's a picture west of Nome, 2003 on the left. You can see your flow direction there. By 2016, you got all these dams, and it's like the whole stream valley is a wetland. As we start to zoom out a little bit more, this is a study led by Ben Jones in 2002. This is behind Kotzebue, where Seth spends a lot of time. Behind Kotzebue, 2 dams in 2002. By 2019, you got 98 dams. This is right behind town. You can be sure that did not go unnoticed in Kotzebue. And then here we go, 2000, this is the North Baldwin Peninsula, again, way out in northwest Alaska. 2010, you had 94. 2010 is the yellow dots. You had 94 dams. By 2019, you got 409 dams. So really profound changes as they move into these new areas. I mean, it reminds you a little bit of people, right? So here, and then at some point, I flew all the rivers and streams of the Arctic tundra in using satellite imagery, right? I didn't really fly them, but I flew them in satellite imagery, and I mapped about 12,000 beaver ponds. And this is a map of beaver pond density. So the gray stuff is all the boreal forest, so just forget about that. But the yellow here is high beaver pond density. So around Nome, the Selawik lowlands right here. And then as you get into blue, you get lower and lower beaver pond density. And what you can see is beavers have really moved out into western Alaska, dramatically. But what's also interesting, this is the continental divide of the Brooks Range, this red line. There are 0 beaver ponds on the north slope of Alaska. Beavers are at the continental divide of the Brooks Range right now, pretty much all the way along. They're in a couple north flowing tributaries. There are a couple beavers in the Congacut, in the Canning, in the upper Naigu, but they're basically, I think, waiting for the climate to ameliorate just a little bit more so the habitat can improve enough so that they can colonize that whole north slope. But, the question is the north slope going to look like this in 20, 50, 100 years? It's unclear. Our modeling shows that by 2100, the entire north slope is colonized by beavers, just like western Alaska right now. So it's kind of amazing. And I should mention, too, there's doubling of beaver ponds from 2003 to 2017. So indigenous knowledge is a big component of this research, which I'm not presenting a lot of right now. Of course, you'll hear from Seth, but we have an entire part of this project starting a year ago that is led by Caroline Brown and Helen Cold at the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. We're working in Shungnak, Kotzebue, and Noatak, and it's knowledge co-production examining many of the same issues that we've already mentioned. Where are they? When did they get there? What are the impacts? This is what it looks like when beavers divert water in an area of permafrost, of ice-rich permafrost. So the stream goes from here to here, and what has happened is the beaver got in here, and within 2 years before this picture was taken, it diverted a bunch of water, dams broke, and just an area about as big as a football field just collapsed. So it's dramatic effects to permafrost, and that's where the thawing comes in, right? But beyond permafrost, there's a lot of other things that we're trying to understand. That's not necessarily our research group, but other research groups that we're working with. Carbon cycling and methane. So we have a paper in review right now that shows that beaver ponds increase methane emissions out in northwest Alaska. I don't think that's a huge surprise, but it's still something that we have to demonstrate. Water quality. Fish is a huge subsistence resource out there. I think that's where a lot of the concern in the villages comes related to beaver engineering. Biodiversity. Boat access, right? Waterways are the roads of the remote regions of Alaska, and so we're just talking about putting 12,000 roadblocks on those roads. Boat access is an issue. And so with beavers and moose, it's complicated because we know that in both cases their habitat is improved. We've got more shrubs. It's not just the shrubs, but it's also that winter is just getting shorter, right? So winter's getting shorter, ice is probably thinner. All those things we think contribute to moose and beavers moving into the tundra. But beavers are also rebounding from being heavily over-trapped in the 18th and 19th and even early 20th century. So part of what we're seeing is also just a rebound from being over-trapped, and we have a hard time sort of differentiating between those different drivers. All right, so just a little summary, and then I'm going to turn it over to Seth. Warming air temperatures are changing the Arctic. You all know that. Permafrost, vegetation, snow cover, the duration of snow cover. Wildlife are responding to those changes. I've showed a couple examples here. And in terms of beaver engineering, I mean, our task as scientists is really to re-envision what Arctic streams look like and how Arctic stream ecosystems work as beavers move into these new areas and continue to change the landscape. So this is the view from Seth's porch. It's not every day that I get to introduce my favorite Alaskan author, so I wrote this down here. It feels a bit like getting on stage with the lead singer in your favorite band. It really does. Mr. Seth Kantner graduated, he went to school at UAF and also at the University of Montana. I believe he graduated with a journalism degree from University of Montana. He's written 5 books, which you saw out there, which have won many awards, and I encourage you to stick around and purchase ones that you haven't read or use them as gifts. That's what I do. He's also a photographer, guide, and commercial fisherman. He spent most of his life on a remote section of the Kobuk River. When I met Seth, I felt, like many of you perhaps feel, that I already knew him on some level through his books and photography. He seems to me like the Bob Dylan of Alaska nature writing. But instead of revealing human qualities, he gives voice to the landscape and its wildlife, revealing aspects of it that are seldom seen or understood by the rest of us. He also describes Alaska Native culture, its rich heritage and recent history with awe, insight, and honesty. Please join me in welcoming Seth Kantner back to Fairbanks and UAF.
Thanks everybody for coming out. It was great to meet Ken, because when you're a homeboy, you think you know the land, but your view is so small, concentrated in one spot, but not satellite, that's for sure. I was born in this igloo here on the Kobuk in 1965, and so I feel comfortable joining his work because I was basically born in a beaver lodge, and lived there. And when I do see beaver come out in the spring and sort of be excited to see the sun and just sitting on an ice pan soaking up light, I marvel at how maybe I think of some of my upbringing as rough, but nothing compared to spending the winter in a beaver lodge where maybe not much conversation and no kerosene lamp and probably no 1 or 2 books. And so my parents were strange back to the landers, and there was a certain number of those back then. And so they spent time here in Fairbanks, studied here at the school. My dad came 53, I guess, and back when it was called College, Alaska, and dirt roads. And he talked about running his dogs to campus and feeding them from the commons. And so when I came here, I was like, well, I don't see any dog teams. But when they moved north, they really admired the old Inupiaq ways. And so we lived in that old way. And certainly a number of people in the village said, Adi, they live like Eskimos. And so they were thinking, that was something you wanted to move away from, those harsh old days. And here were these strange white people wanting to move towards it. At that time, caribou were rebounding from the herd being semi-decimated by the introduction of firearms and change. And like I said, I was born in '65, which was right about when snowmobiles were introduced. So there's huge change, second round of huge changes coming to the Arctic. But in my life at that time, we slept on skins and used sinew for sewing, and cooked, most meals of caribou and pemmican and dried meat, and made mucklucks out of caribou. And meanwhile, every animal was sort of this hierarchy of seasons. What is it? Fat? Is it good eating? Do you need the meat? Do you need this? We were drying rabbits for dog food here. Another one of my correlations to beavers, peeling logs all the time. But somewhere on that list of animals, the beaver were hardworking, working all the time, kind of like what we were doing. Staying home. My family, we stayed home. Our way of visiting was stay home, and travelers would come. And our way of hunting was definitely stay home, because the animals would come, and then you didn't have to haul them anywhere. And we lived in a good spot for caribou and other animals to come. But out in the nearby ponds and in the river were beaver, and we and nobody ever thought to hate an animal or think like, these animals are taking over, which is, now there's this beavers are bad, but we would never think that then. Maybe some people didn't like mosquitoes, but and beaver are just such a solid chunk of not propane, but protein, and good fur, and great for cooking up the tail and boiling the feet and the meat, and then if you need dog food, it just was just such a good thing to have on the land. Back then we did some trapping through the ice in the fall. Ice got super thick, so it wasn't any fun to trap too late in the year. But there was always plenty of beaver around. The beaver seemed to have nice homes in ponds, and then in spring they would swim in the river, and my dad would make kayaks, and us kids, my brother and I, would paddle around barefoot in our kayaks, and we could do whatever we wanted as long as we wore a life preserver. We didn't know how to swim, but we had to wear a life preserver, and so we would hunt beaver in the spring, and often at night, and portaging from pond to pond. And we'd try to get the fur when it was dark, before the sun sort of suntanned their back. But we quickly figured out that hunting them in the spring was a lot easier than chopping through the ice, and it was just a good time to gather beaver. When the ice went out, villagers would push their boats in and go hunt everything that moved, ducks and geese and beaver and bears and caribou, and so every beaver was sort of seen as a good thing. The ubiquitous beaver hat. Even now, when you make a hat out of New Zealand possum or whatever the ladies in the village order now, that's on sale at the fur buyer, or the tanned furs from Anchorage and other places, we still say, "Where's my beaver hat?" Even though if it's made from New Zealand possum or some tanned fur from somewhere. And so beaver were used around the trim of sunshine ruffs and parkas, and then all sorts of things that the fur was used for. As the times have sort of moved forwards, each one of these animals have had to deal with the change that has come really fast up there. And one of the animals that was really valuable and well liked was black bear. We just love black bear. They're so good eating, and who doesn't like bear fat and black bear rendered for pie and whatever. It's just a great animal. Now we have almost no black bears. They're almost completely gone. We have lots of grizzly bears. Mixed in there during those years of my young life along the Kobuk, if you wanted green American money, trapping was one of the main ways. And then commercial fishing, and then there were a few jobs. The majority back then in the old days was firefighting, summer jobs, maybe some construction. Furs were a big deal. And each year we saw some pretty crazy changes of more rabbits, more lynx. This animal that we'd see tracks of a couple times a year, pine marten, suddenly there were just more and more and more of them, and the price was pretty high for those furs. I think the first moose got to Kotzebue. People talked about, they saw, I can't remember the word now, but I want to say tutupuk, which is caribou with the word P-U-K at the end, which means big. And they saw big tracks, and they followed the tracks to the end, and they came to this big caribou, and they shot it, and they said, tastes fair. That was the first moose that got up there. And there's more to say about moose, which is pretty interesting, but I won't get too bogged down. But I think an important part here that I never thought about as a kid was, first of all, living way out there. The animal we saw the least often were humans, and it was pretty exciting. It was very exciting. And I don't know if you guys feel that way when you go out and see a human, but I notice I don't feel that way anymore. But if we did see some speck that wasn't right, we'd say, travelers, travelers. And that was the word that was used in the village, too, was travelers. And we'd run and tell my parents. And most other animals that you saw didn't rate that high up. You weren't going to run and say something about the other animals. But travelers were pretty rare. And so in the list of things that wasn't obvious to me was sort of our closeness to the land. You know, people talk about connection to the land. We never talked about connection to the land. Why would we? Makes no sense. And then now I'm starting to see like, oh yeah, that is why we sort of noticed a lot of the different changes, because the food, that's where we shopped, so to speak. And the Inupiaq culture, there's no tourism idea like, oh, what a pretty mountain or something. That wasn't the traditional way of looking at the land. It was, you know, is there firewood? Is there a place to camp? Is there water? Is there some animal that you can collect? And as a result, first of all, we're in Northwest Alaska where the change is exponential, you know, climate change. But then with that focus on the land, it's a pretty strong thing to see so many changes. This is the Baldwin Peninsula, which I'm noticing these trees are sneaking up on us. But the other thing that's just everywhere now is willows and alders, and it's scary. It's just like if your lawn was suddenly 20 feet tall everywhere. It's out of hand. And separate from all that is the weather changes, and there's just endless things to say about that too, how it all fits together. But the ice storms that we're getting in Kotzebue since I came here, you know, in the last couple of days, and is forming these layers that make it harder for everything. It wasn't until recently that I thought about the layer halfway down this winter, thick layer of ice from December 7th or whenever it poured rain. You know, whether the mice can get up and down, and whether the weasels can get up and down, and whether the fox. And I've been thinking more about the moose and muskox and caribou and stuff, but hard on everything. Especially these guys, for example. The weather changes, and then I don't know if the vegetation changes are as hard on them as the weather changes. Here is one of my examples of, you can see their backs, no fur at all. And if you have any experience with muskox, you know they're hard to skin, hard to get to the meat. The sleeping bag that they wear all the time is so thick. And these guys, you can count their spine on their backs. And so they got too much rain in the winter, and they got range rot and lost their hair. And each little animal that you run into, I'm still going to get back to beaver, Ken, sorry, has this interaction with nature and interaction with each other, and that all sounds like a science book. But if you're out there all the time hanging out with these guys, you see the actual highs and lows of their dealing with change. these guys, the two animals that I admire all the animals, but really admire beaver for their hard work and staying home and sticking with it every day. But porcupine have a real different world view. They don't have that fight or flight. What would our lives be like without fight or flight? What do they have instead? I'm really curious about that. And muskox, to a certain extent, have some of that too, because they'll run a little, but they don't want to waste energy by running, so they stay in a clump or a circle. And so their whole existence is parallel to ours in a little different way. And it's there's a lot to figure out how they're dealing with their change, and then dealing with people like me, who are busy wanting to get meat from the land, and I think it's real hard to figure out. I think when I was a kid, it was really obvious. We just went out every day and we got whatever moved. We went after it, brought it home and ate it. And now it's been a interesting experience to figure out where I fit into this predator zone. Everybody working hard to make a living out there. So back to the concept of focus. Ptarmigan are a really neat example. They now turn white and the tundra's still brown, and they're standing there, and it's kind of embarrassing. I have a tough time with the clothing thing, and wondering what you're supposed to wear and what's in style. And so here's this ptarmigan that's got this time thing set up for, I don't know exactly what day it is that they're like, oh, we need to, become white people. But now when they do it, the tundra's still brown. And the other thing I'm noticing is this, these crops. What's going on? Have you guys seen that much food stuffed into the crop at the front of the ptarmigan? I don't know who hunts here and who. As a kid, we didn't have balloons, so we would take a straw. We'd take the crop out of the ptarmigan and we'd tie a piece of sinew around the part that goes to the throat, and then we'd stick either some sort of a tube, that whatever we had, in the tube that goes to their gizzard, and we would blow it up, and then we'd tie it, and that was our balloon. And so we would be able to see, like, oh, they're eating cranberries now, or they're eating. We didn't have a lot of other entertainment. But that focus, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm hopefully not trying to brag about it. It's just what we did. If you watch me drive a car, you'll notice that I wasn't focusing on that. So as far as these changes and these storms and this amount of snow and rain and everything else, there's a beaver lodge under there. I'm very curious. I'm going to work with Ken here in another month, coming from Nome to Kotzebue, looking for beaver lodges and doing whatever he does, which I don't know what it is. But I'm like, oh, wow, there's a beaver lodge. I know there is because I walked out there in the fall, but it looks like it's going to be hard to find. And so as far as our old igloo where I was born and spent the first part of my life, we always really valued getting buried in the fall because it made our house warmer. And basically it's like styrofoam, but it's free. Not bad for the environment. And so that snow would just bury our house, and then it'd be warmer. And I'm noticing these beaver, some of these years that when we don't get snow and it's super cold, last year, there are lodges out there. It looks very horrible. Ice is freezing thicker and thicker, and they've got this house that's insulated with basically concrete, frozen dirt. And so they're really susceptible to these changes too. At home on the Kobuk, the permafrost has been melting so fast that the white spruce, not the black spruce, but the white spruce are busy making children everywhere. I guess that could probably be followed from satellites too, but it's incredibly disconcerting. Tundra that I'm used to walking and hunting, looking for caribou. It's just turning, some of you people have walked this tundra up the hill from where our old place was, and it's turning into, rapidly turning into forest. I'm convinced that everything wants to take over the world, and last couple of years I've thought it was redpolls, and I don't know if they were down here in such numbers, but scary, the amount of redpolls that were coming through in waves, like hundreds and hundreds of redpolls coming through there along the Kobuk. And it's funny, I'd be out chopping or cutting wood and limbing trees or something, and my daughter was with me, and she was like, I'm almost tired of hearing there. And it's a funny thing to say in the winter because it's really nice to see redpolls. Most of the other birds have left and everything, but so many. Separate from redpolls wanting to take over the world are Labrador tea. Scary if you've traditionally gone to this spot to pick blueberries and then you go back and not only is it the blueberries are gone, but the Labrador tea is so high and thick it's hard to even hardly walk. And so they also are hoping to take over the world. And as the permafrost has melted or thawed, or I don't know the proper terminology, but gone deeper down or ceased to be there altogether, it feels to me like each one of these species has its opportunities. And some years there's been so many blueberries you can't think straight, or ockpicks, salmonberries, whatever you want to call them, cloudberries, everybody calls them something different. And then the next year maybe there's just almost none, which puts huge pressure on whoever lives out there and eats salmonberries. The cranberries have been a very important part of my diet my whole life. I'm addicted to picking berries. This fall I picked 20 gallons, I guess, or something, and generally like cranberry sauce every night. And the old Inupiaq advice was if you eat a lot of fat, you should eat cranberries with it because it makes sure you're not going to get sick and you can eat more fat. But these cranberries are the shrubbery is 2 or 3 times taller than it was when I was a kid. So it's once again disconcerting. Like, who are you people? And the kids in the village are taller too. So somehow I missed out on the whole whole thing. I guess that's from the school lunches or something. But yeah. So sadly enough, in my abilities to deal with electronics and stuff are really terrible, and so I don't have the sequence I would have liked to show. But this is the tundra right behind where I was born, which back then was open tundra. And I have this sequence that shows my dad's cache and them standing there. I showed it last night in my thing, but and it's open tundra, and you glance up when you're splitting wood or something, you could see caribou coming a half a mile away, and now it's just trees and then dwarf birch, which are supposed to be dwarfs, but now they're 6 or 8 feet tall, and it's just a forest happening in the last 50 years. Flying over the country, I'm seeing the melting and then the regrowth around these warm circles, and once again, it's just disconcerting to see the land look like an asteroid or something, and this all has to do with the thawing. So there's a lodge behind there, and when I was a kid, we weren't very fancy with our trapping. My dad just said, look for the bubble trails and chop a hole, put your trap there. And generally we thought of the lodge having 2 entrances, and then the bubble trails go out to the food pile. And now when I've been trapping lately, I'm just like, oh, I think I know what I'm doing. It's methane. It's not, it's all mixed together with the beavers trails, and there's tons of methane, and so if you punch it and light your match at the same time, it can burn your eyelashes off if that's something you want to do for fun. Back to the concept of change in animals is the humans changing. We just have people are less focus on the land, more coming and going by plane. The price of furs versus the price of axe handles and wire and nails and all that is just is a weird deal. You know, a fox now, I don't know what it's worth, but probably $20, and that doesn't buy you too much. And so when I was a kid, I trapped. When I was 8, I trapped, and my parents were not trapping fox at that point. They're trapping wolverines and stuff. But and the prices of furs then were like $60, $80 for a fox. In 8 years old, I was 1973. And so $80 for a fox in 1973 versus 20 now has made so nobody's out trapping foxes, for example. And just about everything about our relationship to the land, and then all our communication devices has made so that when you were making lists of change, the people, we don't always realize how much we've changed. This is a beaver in front of Kotzebue. So traditionally, there weren't beaver there, and nobody thought about beaver and Kotzebue. And then the land behind the Baldwin Peninsula has got a lot of sort of pingo, little knobby hills that have all sunk in the middle, and then a little ice pond there, and ponds between. But there weren't beaver. There were just low shrubs and stuff. And then Ken was explaining now it's in the last 25 years it's plugged full of beavers. In the list of change, the water, we used to love breakup. It's such an important time of year, and it's funny when you talk to people who live in towns or something, often they hate breakup. We love breakup. It's a long winter in your little beaver lodge or whatever you're living in, and along comes breakup, which is just the analogy of birthing a new season. It's a winter is just suddenly there's summer and birds and bugs and water, wet water, and just so much change coming. But then breakup used to be gnashing ice, knocking over trees, and maybe crushing your boat and all sorts of crazy stuff. The last many years, myself and other elders, getting older slowly, but other people have been like, why didn't we have a good so-called good breakup, exciting breakup? And I don't think it was until talking to Ken and me explaining to him that what I felt like the water was doing, and then him explaining to me what the water was doing, was that this change in the permafrost layer is making drainage be different, and underground water mixing with above ground water in different ways. And so the last spring we had very cold winter, thick ice, stayed cold till the end, and then got warm, and all the good stuff for the big gnashing breakup, and then nothing, just sloughed away. And I think it has to do with what the groundwater's doing, and somewhere in there we're getting these incredible runs at times of salmon returns, which I think the water's not freezing to the bottom of the streams as much, and then maybe there's more groundwater coming up through the percolating through the fine rocks and stuff, and feeding these young fish and sending them out to the ocean. Because of many things, grizzly bears have been pretty happy about life, and having as many children as possible, and then living off of those salmon carcasses that are kind of everywhere now. And that's dispersed, I got the wrong word, but put pressure on the black bears, and then us humans have put quite a bit of pressure on them. So we seldom see black bears anymore, and we see lots of juvenile delinquent grizzly bears. This is the Baldwin Peninsula, and there's a beaver lodge in the foreground, and then one sort of smack dab on the horizon there. And it's pretty weird to come across these and say, what do you guys eat? And because you think of beavers in a place where there's maybe cottonwoods and nice willows and a good food pile and stuff, and there's just not much going on as far as that goes. And so I think they are eating, more shrubs, more small stuff, and then as Ken and I were talking today, maybe more aquatic underwater stuff that can help them make it through the winter and maybe the summer too. I don't know, but it's very weird to see these newcomers because they weren't there before. There's a couple caribou beyond that beaver lodge, and the caribou are dealing with all sorts of things now and changing their migration. All this brush, I think, is blocking them. Up home, it's very popular to blame the outside sport hunters, which is a comforting thing to do because then it's not your fault in any way, shape, or form. But I'm a little bit suspect of that being completely accurate. I think there's a lot going on the land and the lichens and the food supply, and it feels like the time that the rut takes place now is a little later, and I suspect that has to do with the fact that if you have a cauliflower and you stress it, it goes to seed. And I think the stress of migration and cold coming 50 years ago happened in September, and that made caribou rut, mate in early October. And now that rut is later, but I think they're not having those stresses in September of snow and ice and change happening them, and a lot of times they're not migrating at all by then. They haven't started because they're not being pushed by whatever forces. So we're finding all these different changes, but what's affecting the people the most is that they're not migrating at all south of the Kobuk or much later in the year. So that's the idea that I said it's nice to have snow around your house, because if that wind's blowing, Kotzebue traditionally has really cold weather, and I know it gets cold here, but there it's often like 28 below and blowing 30, 40 miles an hour. That'll take the heat out of your house. And there you are sticking up on the Baldwin Peninsula. And so any winter that doesn't have snow, these guys have a tough go of it. So this is not home. Last spring, I think my friend Don Reardon, a writer from Bethel, said, I want you to come to Bethel with me and we'll do a reading. And I did, and I peered out of the chat and I was like, wow, beavers have some, it's hard to know which way to go there as far as road signs and country. And I was also thinking about, geese and ducks and how many places to go. And then I flew home somewhere, I don't know where I was. And anyway, there's a lot of country out there if you start stretching your brain out and thinking all the way from Kobuk River to Bethel country, and who knows where you're going to be setting up your lodge. So as far as beavers, I said early on that when I was a kid, we would see them with their nice homes in lakes with a dam, and we'd see them in the river when most of these would be the teenagers that their parents said, go make your own lodge. And so we'd see those guys in the river. But as the years went by, I started seeing beavers sort of slapping mud against the side of the Hunt River or the Nuna River or the Kobuk River and building homes in what I thought of as pretty crappy place to build a home, and pretty crappy looking homes. And all I could think of was barrios, or what you hear about in different countries. And then like, is this like people? Like, there's this pressure, you got to build somewhere, and you come to that nice pond that has always had a lodge in it, and somebody's already there. They're like, GTFO. And so, but then what is really going on? Is it so the country can support more, but the good spots are taken? And whoa, does that sound familiar with the housing crunch? And so, yeah, it's been real interesting watching them with the change. And then you'll see a brown line here. This fall was a perfect example. It, big flood in end of August, I guess. And so any beaver that got started on his bank account, his and her bank account, winter food supply, willows, gone. I'm seeing that more and more, the food piles getting washed away. And then Ken and Carolyn came up September 10, I think it was, or something like that. And the water was going back down, and we went and looked at beaver lodges, and oh yeah, there's a beaver lodge, and boy, what is that? Is that like the guest cabin? I hadn't seen that before. There's a food pile in the front, and then certain things are just different than and all my life we've had beavers made lodges, but they didn't have guest cabins. What's going on here? And then this is at the mouth of the Nuna, and I took them there, and I was like, oh, this is one of the biggest lodges around, and here's their food pile. It doesn't look as big as I'd expect, but there it is, whatever. Maybe they're holding off because you never know, it's going to maybe flood again. And then they left, and then Typhoon Murdoch or whatever came through, and holy crap, did it ever flood again? Worse. And then there goes food piles again. There goes their bank accounts. The tundra's getting, grassier and the vegetation changing. There's still open tundra, but it's those are the jade mountains in the background. There's a food pile that floated away. That's a good food pile. I mean, it was, but now it's and it shipwrecked on a sandbar, but it's not where it was. Getting more forest fires that feel pretty terrifying, but once again, that's the future coming our way, and what that does for vegetation growth. This is the tough part that I may or may not have been smart to include, but the climate change affecting humans, and so we've got the animals facing what the different species are dealing with, but we travel on ice, and we have traditional knowledge, but a lot of times that's no good anymore. We say, this is the dangerous spot, and then, the ice is thin everywhere. And so there's a lot more drowning going on in different situations, some of it based on different practices out in the country. But this was basically my brother growing up, drowned under the ice, and we're making his coffin. And it's been, it's certainly been a journey watching the humans and the land and everything change, but it's been pretty concentrated up there. And I think that's maybe something that I've worked to explain to people is that focus that is at home on the land, and that relationship to the land, and that getting food from the land, and then that suffering from change is all sort of kind of the way it works with this climate change. Meanwhile, out there are the caribou, so I better wrap it up. I think I'll stop there. Thanks a lot.
All right. Where are you two going?
Oh, I don't know.
We'll do questions in just a sec here. I want to let everyone know that we obviously have a great crowd here tonight, but online we have 120 people. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to be over here. Sorry guys. We have 120 people joining us online. So hello, audience there. All right, come on up. Let's do questions. A reminder: if you've got one, put your hand up, and we will bring a microphone to you. And my colleague, where is Ray, the microphone fairy? There she is over there. Okay, well, let's go. Ray, you want to find one first? Okay.
Thank you for the both wonderful talks. I was wondering, we saw, Ken showed a picture early on, kind of looking down at a beaver pond up north with turquoise water, and it looked very shallow. And so this idea that a lot of, especially historically, they would have frozen to the bed, and now we have a different ice phenology, so there can be liquid water. We saw in Patagonia that where the beavers had invaded, they're digging in the shallow ponds, they're actually digging channels, creating deep spots. So when the whole rest of the pond freezes, they've got waterways where they have engineered that they know will not freeze. Do you ever see that up in the tundra?
Absolutely. Actually, we went round and round this fall because there seems to be like just tunnels dug into the banks now, and I don't know where they go. I want to know. And they come out, some of them come out up on the land. I'm just wondering if they're actually leaving to Arizona or something for the winter. No, sorry. I can't help myself. But yeah, definitely, we've always seen that. Every effort they can to make the water deeper, to build the dam and to dig out areas. And you can find them pretty easy. Lately, we'll have a pond where we usually hunt ducks or something, and then you go back a couple days later and the whole thing's gone. And that's that thermal karst drainage, which is basically, permafrost has made a like a concrete swimming pool, and then when it melts, poof, gone. And then you can see everything, you can see the lodge and the holes and everything where they've dug those channels.
Yeah, absolutely. Great observation from Patagonia. That's pretty cool that you guys have been down there and seen those beavers. The other thing I saw is I think that's also a way that they can deal in these parts of the pond that are pretty shallow where you do get the ice. My guess is that they're actually digging down sometime. That ice comes down, it's like, well, you need a little space, so you dig that channel out a little bit. I think I saw that last summer at one of those slides I showed where the ice was, there was about that much water down at the bottom, but I went back in the summer, it was like you could see places where it looked like they may have channeled it out. Yeah, they do a lot of excavating.
All right, we had a few hands. There, okay.
Yeah, I had a couple questions for Ted and one for Seth. So I get maybe the simplest question first. Ted, you said something about in one of the photos you showed there was the dam under the snow and it was frozen above the dam and there was open water down below, and you said something about warm water coming out from the dam. Have you measured that, and where would the warmth be coming from? That's my first question.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the picture you're talking about. Well, I guess the point is that there's, that's the place with the deepest water on the landscape, and certainly in that stream. And so that water is, there is some water coming down that stream that's feeding that beaver pond, but I think it goes into that beaver pond, it probably warms up a bit, and then gets kicked out sort of on the edge of the dam and seeping through the dam. And so you've got warm water that is preventing it from freezing.
So the warmth would be from the little bit of sunlight that it gets, and it would stay in the pond because the pond is so immobile.
I think it's just warmer because it's deeper water, I
Really?
guess. But I think there's, you have to have, if there was no water coming down into that pond, it wouldn't last for very long.
Right. Okay, second question. You were talking about the change of the permafrost and saying, yeah, this is happening really fast, but it took 7,000 years for it to get to where it was before. Are these changes reversible? What did you mean? Did you mean reversible by humans, or did you mean reversible by nature? What did you mean when you said, are these changes reversible?
Well, could you get back to the first, how would you get, you went from one picture, you went from the flat planar tundra to the thermokarst in a few warm years, right?
Right.
So what would it take to get back to the first picture?
It would take another glaciation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that it would, possibly. And so I guess the point is that why didn't that thermokarst happen before, in the previous X thousand years, right? So you're seeing something that looks like a pretty anomalous event, not just a warming that you might get every couple decades.
Okay. Okay.
That's a great question. I don't know if I did a very good job explaining
Well,
it.
I think it's a really interesting observation and a really interesting question
Yeah.
that you asked.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and so Seth, we have cabins down in way down in the Cayuse country, down in the bottom of the Cayuse Flats, and I've been going down there. I first built a cabin down there in the mid-'70s, and I think it's just been in the last few years that I've seen food piles like that. Why are they starting to pile the food? I was asking myself, why are they starting to pile the food up instead of cramming those branches down into the mud where it's going to stay below the ice?
Okay, so you said first time you've seen food piles like that.
Yeah.
What do you mean that? Before they were
like the ones you had in your picture.
Okay, so what I've always thought of as the food pile thing is that that they pile it up and they're trying to get it to just be such a pile that it's from the bottom up, and they just keep piling it until it reaches whatever the bottom is.
Okay, so you're saying it starts at the bottom?
Well, I think that I don't know enough to answer that for sure, but I've always just thought that it goes from the bottom to where it's floating, and then that part has less value because it's above the ice, it's all frozen in, and it's the bottom part that conceivably they can swim to and grab a piece and take home, and whatever's sticking up is just going to be frozen in the spring and the ice and stuff, and because they can't get to that. I feel like the food piles are getting smaller up home, and I feel like they're onto something. I just don't know what it is, and I suspect it's aquatic plants or something. And the other thing is that anybody who lives in a lake and has a dam and a house and a, what do they call it now, McMansion, is their food pile's not going anywhere. It's just a great world they live in. It's the ones that now are building along these pretty swift streams that it's just so tenuous. And I assume there's some correlation to day trading or something that and maybe that's why they are making smaller food piles. I mean, if you saw your entire bank account head downriver in fall time, late fall, it'd be disconcerting, and maybe they're more cognizant of reality than we give them credit for, and they're just like, I'm not going to do that again. I'm just going to, I don't know.
One last question. Do you distinguish in your country between the bank beaver and the pond beaver?
Well, that's kind of what I guess that's kind of what I'm saying, is that I feel like we just didn't used to have bank beaver. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's get somebody from my side of the room so I can get some exercise. Hands
While
up.
you're doing that, actually, I'm going to ask some online questions. So let's see who in the audience wants to go next. And while you're on your way to them, I'll read some.
Hands up anywhere?
So Doug and Sarah on Zoom, I'm going to group their questions together. Doug asks, are beavers expanding their range in the Russian Arctic? How do beavers affect projections of global warming? And similarly, Sarah asks, neat talk. I'm also curious about the parallels and differences between beaver expansion into the Arctic and introduction to Patagonia.
Those are great questions. We don't know a lot about the Russian Arctic. They're pretty far, I would say they're pretty far south of the Arctic. They're still rebounding from overtrapping across. They're doing pretty well in Europe, but in Asia, they are way far south of the Arctic still. That's what we think, at least. We're supposed to do some mapping in the next few years in Russia. And then how are they contributing to, these feedbacks to further warming? That's a tough question. I don't know that we have a complete answer to that either. Obviously, thawing permafrost is potentially a positive feedback to warming, but on what scale is that happening? And creating wetlands might also trap a lot of carbon. So you know, in the short term, you might thaw some permafrost, but, you know, over a few decades, I think we don't really have an answer to that question yet, but it's a good one.
All right, any other hands going up? Oh, there we go. Ray, on your side, where are you? There you are.
Two things. I understand that this increase in shrubs is happening all over in Colorado, in the southern mountains. And I did research there and then went back 20 years later. And I was amazed at the changes. And I was told at that time that they were suspecting that it had something to do with the increase in carbon dioxide, that the shrubs were really eating this up as another nutrient, or using it more completely than they had in the past. Now, whether that's true, I haven't heard any more research about that, but it may be somehow related to the methane as well. And the other thing is I've done some work on the Yukon Flats and gone back to the same areas over time. And those lakes, sometimes they're full of water and sometimes they're gone. And they call it a thermokarst type stuff. And I know that the permafrost on the Yukon Flats is different than the Arctic, but it had something to do with winter weather and the recreation of permafrost. It only takes, 2 years for this layer of ice to form, and it ebbs and flows. And whether this will also happen in the Arctic, it's too early to tell, but it is a possibility that we need to keep our minds open about, I think.
Thanks for those observations.
Well, Joan, you started paying attention to trees a heck of a long time ago, and yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know the answers to any of that. Certainly not about the carbon dioxide, but.
All right, any other hands up?
Any other questions that we can't answer?
I have a couple more from online still. Question from Doug on Zoom. Do you have any idea why grizzly bears have replaced black bears?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Opinions, maybe not ideas. I think it took me about 30 years to finally find a bear turd with little bear claws in it. It's easier to find little moose hooves, sadly enough. But there used to be sort of this feeling that the biggest bears enjoyed eating small bears. And a lot of the big bears ended up having a tough go of it when, the sport hunters showed up, and that's what they were after. And so that's one theory, idea maybe, that made it easier for some young grizzly bears to make a go of it. Then the whole thing with salmon, I think, has really helped them make it through the late fall and go to their dens fat. That expansion of moose is a perfect thing. Alvin and I used to follow bear tracks after we'd get a crust on the layer of the snow, so you could see the bear track on top of the crust. And then they would get to a moose trench, and the moose is not staying on top of the crust. And then you would get to a point where there was only one track. The bear was on top of the moose. And that was bears coming out in May and saying, boy, I'm hungry, and it'd be sure nice to have moose. And then if you go a little later in May, May 20-something, along comes the calves. And grizzly bears are really great at getting moose calves. And so that expansion of moose has made them have some supplies in the spring. And then that expansion of salmon has had them supplies in the fall. Black bears I don't see eating salmon as much, which is one of the detrimental things for them, because it makes them taste better to us. And so at home, every black bear is sought after, and if possible for people to get, they will. And so if you put all that together, it's not a good time to be a black bear. I think I had all the pieces.
All right, and we have a question on my side of the room. Here we go.
So you've given a lot of observations about various animals up there. I'm curious about any observations over the years related to wolves.
Oh, very interesting. That's for Ken, right? It's incredibly interesting, the wolf thing. My dad did not trap wolves. Once in a while he would get one, but pretty rarely, and the wolves were kind of always around our house. And they didn't eat our dogs, which is kind of amazing to me now, but they would be, you'd wake up in the morning, they'd be on the river howling at the dogs, or they'd just be around. They were our companions. And then when snowmobiles came, the villagers were always looking for wolves. People loved chasing wolves and getting wolves. Back then, a wolf skin was worth like $400 to $500 to $600. And so when my brother and I were teens, say 15 years old, we were trapping wolverines and foxes and lynxes, and we would take our dogs and run to the village, spend the day slogging along behind the dogs to get to the village to sell our wolverine skins, and we would get $300 to $400 for a wolverine skin. And so there was a lot of pressure on wolves. Snowmobiles were coming along, which is increasing that pressure because people needed money, and wolves were money. There was also, before that, the bounty on wolves, which put tons of pressure on wolves, and it had knocked them pretty far back. So wolves had a lot of pressure on them. Now, as the caribou herd grew, there was a lot more food supply, and wolves were still sought after, but then there was more and more wolves, and then the price went down. People were wearing way less furs. I don't know what the price of a wolf is in the village now, but I would say $200 to $300 if you could sell it, and that's $200 to $300 now in 2000 and whatever we're at. $200 to $300. Jug of whiskey is $200 to $300, and so they just and the snowmobiles are really expensive, and you go out and something breaks off. Oh, the 300, 400 pieces are breaking off your snow. Gas is $15 a gallon, and so the reason to go after wolves, and then the people that knew how to really pursue wolves are not there. The pressure to do that is not there. And so wolves are in town now. People are like, there's wolves in town, and et cetera. So wolves are way up. And I could say a lot more about wolves, but don't get me started.
All right, I'm told we have a couple of more online questions.
We do, and I'm going to couple these ones together as well. Question from Alana on Zoom. Beavers have yet to colonize north of the Brooks Range. Can you repeat the current projection of that happening? With that estimation in mind, what are your thoughts on further oil development on the North Slope in relation to this activity furthering the degradation of the permafrost, referring to ConocoPhillips' Willow Project? Is it enough of a warming effect to push the North Slope beaver takeover timeline? And similarly, Willa on Zoom said, great talk. How do beavers colonize new areas over the mountains? Do you think they would ever reach carrying capacity?
Yeah.
Lots of questions for you at once.
100. So our projection, which is the more aggressive, it's RCM 8.5, whatever, it's the more aggressive climate projection, shows the whole North Slope being filled with beavers by 2100. I'm waiting on results for some of the intermediate projections because I'd just like to know, well, what does that look like in 2050? How it's going to affect oil development, I don't know. What's my take on oil development? I don't think I'm going to touch that one either. But how do they colonize the North Slope? Was that part of the question too? Well, all they have to do now is swim downstream. And they're right at the Continental Divide, which is actually a place that's pretty high, so it's actually colder, more windswept, fewer shrubs. So it's really the lower part of those rivers. I think if they swim 60, 80 miles downstream, they're in some pretty good habitat, but that's a real leap of faith when you don't know that habitat's there when you start out swimming downstream. So yeah, it'll be ambitious, and it'll be a very pioneering group of beavers that first swims downstream on the Colville.
I got a question for you, Ken. So are you saying that they've already gone over the divide and they're sitting at the headwaters of the Cutler? Or they're on
They're on the Niagoo.
Oh, they're on the Niagoo. Oh, okay.
They're just over the Continental Divide, pretty much, or at the Continental Divide all the way along the Brooks Range from the Canadian Arctic all the way over.
You said something. Okay, so you said something about ambitious, but my experience with taking the wrong trail is it's not ambitious. You're on the wrong trail.
Maybe we should leave it at that.
All right. Shall we wrap it up, or do you have any? Okay, we'll call that it. Or let's have some appreciation here.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, that's a wrap not only for tonight, but for this year's lecture series. So thank you all for coming. Thanks to our online audience, and drive home safe. The roads, I suppose, are a little slick.